Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, video coming across the feed. Looks to be super popular, and it's got a great title and topic. It's called The Failed Cures for the Plague. So this is by a channel called Good Enough, and this video came out 13 days ago and has 1.5 million views. So you know I got to check this out. The plague is something I enjoy teaching in school because it can really get the attention of the students for the awful things about it, about how brutal it was, how deadly it was, and how painful it was. But then all the mystery surrounding it is interesting to talk about. So we'll see what they got here and see what I can add to it. Our original video is down below. Make sure to support this channel. All right, let's get started. All right,
And slowly work our way towards the most horrifying things on the list. Number 10, the Four Thieves vinegar. So legend has it that a group of four thieves would loot and ransack the homes of people who had recently died from the plague. They would go on to steal from dozens of victims without any of them ever getting sick. They stayed safe by rubbing a secret potion over their entire bodies. But eventually, these thieves would be caught and apprehended by the authorities. They were then offered their freedom in exchange for the recipe of this secret potion, which they revealed to be a mixture of vinegar, garlic, herbs, and spices. No one knows for certain if this story is true, but this was a very popular tale during this time period. This would lead merchants to go door to door selling this vinegar mixture as a preventative for the plague. Buyers were instructed to rub this potion on their hands, ears, and temple. But
I just got a comment on so I haven't seen this channel before. It's definitely got like salmonella vibes, especially with the artistry and the you know what I mean, the anime or the art of just the creepy looking characters there. But yeah, going back to this, nobody knew what was going on, really. Let's be honest. Like, you know, there were so many different things that people were saying was, you know, the reason for the plague, but the cures and treatments, because none of it worked. And because of that, you got all these different ideas. Plus, you're going to have those shady salesmen. They're going to try to benefit off this by making up stuff that is not going to be any different than anything else. So it's going to be hard to falsify. But yeah, you better believe people were trying to make money on this. And because everything they tried was going to fail anyway. So people were going to try anything.
This would lead merchants to go door to door selling this vinegar mixture as a preventative for the plague. Buyers were instructed to rub this potion on their hands, ears, and temple. But if the merchant had them hook, line, and sinker, he would simply just tell them to lather it over their entire bodies. Since everyone knows the #1 rule in sales is always upsell when you can. And surprisingly, this potion would work really well against the bubonic plague, thanks to the mixture containing the herb mugwort, which is a natural bug repellent. And since the bubonic plague was spread from the fleas of infected rodents, this would prove to be one of the very few remedies that actually worked. But sadly, fleas were not the only way of contracting the Black Plague.
I was gonna say, so the fleas were the big way, right? That's how it especially spread along the Silk Road, which is how it came across eventually to Europe. But yeah, it looks like this was a cure, only in the fact that not on purpose, because they didn't understand the biology of it, just happened to work based off of some things that they probably didn't even take account for. But when it came to a lot of plague cures too, a lot of stuff that people were doing was actually made it worse. Things like bloodletting, you know, cut open those pores, but then the germs would spread around. I mean, the only thing you could really do is try to treat the symptoms, make them feel better, you know, but you had to quarantine. I mean, that's the only thing that could happen there, which was very hard to do.
The second method being much more deadly and was most commonly spread from human to human. This would be known as the pneumonic plague, which often carried a 100% mortality rate. This form usually spreads when a person inhales the airborne droplets of an infected person.
Your spit.
Which caused the disease to infect the lungs. And of course, the potion would prove to be completely useless against this form of infection. Number 9.
Yeah, so you had the like bubonic plague, pneumonic plague. Basically what happens is viruses evolve, and that's what happened with that. So in the first phase of it, which could again have a mortality rate of maybe 50% up to 70 or so, you had to have a lot more physical contact. All right. And so you had to be in closer proximity, but it evolved in a way that it was able to carry on tiny little particulates of your saliva. It got down to that. And anytime you speak, I know this sounds gross, but anytime you speak, you're giving out little bits of, saliva, and it could carry like that. So it just evolved to be able to be on smaller and smaller hosts. And then, as you can imagine, something that evolves that quickly too can also be more deadly. And if you got the pneumonic plague, you're a goner, and it could act quick. Sometimes the plague could take a few days to go over, but there are cases where people felt healthy in the morning and were dead by the end of the day. So it said dine with your family. No. It said like have your breakfast with your family and dine with your ancestors. That was a creepy description of it.
Quack doctors. Throughout history, when the Black Plague would break out, those with financial means would flee from cities and escape to the countryside. This would, of course, include the majority of the city's doctors, leaving behind a massive and lucrative market for quacks, where they would post up on city corners selling powders, potions, magical cures, and anything else that they could think of.
Basically, too, you had people that were basically like wizards. They would cast spells and stuff like that. It's like witchcraft, which you'd think would be, very much against the cultural values at that time. But like priests and stuff, they couldn't do anything about it. So they were like, we'll just try anything.
They would yell at the top of their lungs at people walking by, letting them know that they were selling the latest and greatest cures or preventatives for the plague or any other ailments. Are you in search for the best preventative for the plague? Then you need to be eating unicorn horn powder. What the hell are you doing? Have a stomach ache? Oh, that's the first sign of the plague. So drink this fermented potion. Tastes terrible. Shut up and drink it. Don't you want to feel better? Of course you do. Feeling ill? Eat a baby foot. Have a headache? Place this magical stone under your bed. Sniff the squirrel hide. Cover yourself in salmon oil and jump into your neighbor's bath. You will be feeling better by tomorrow. But if for some reason, by some miracle, my 100% guaranteed remedy doesn't work, come back for a full refund after 10 days of your initial first symptoms.
Yeah, no. By the way, sharing bath water was a horrible thing because you do that, try to get clean, but you share that stuff sometimes. That was one of the worst ways that you could spread it.
Now, here's a list of some of the most common...
But then also, not bathing was also bad for you. So it's like, you were screwed either way.
That a quack doctor would sell throughout history. Just so you can get an idea of how scummy these guys really were. Snake oil, of course. Chill and fever tonic. Miracle elixirs that cured pretty much everything. Ointments that would cure baldness.
Well, it's because those like elixirs, they were just laced with all kinds of horrible drugs and stuff, like cocaine, LSD, all this stuff. So yeah, it made you feel good, but boy, did it have side effects. And it had nothing to do with curing the actual ailment. It just pumped you up with hallucinogenic, addictive things.
But my favorite one, a tincture that would restore life in the event of sudden death.
What? Bring it back to life? Oh, did you have to be dead to use it?
And since these quacks sold whatever they wanted, we can only assume that there's probably hundreds of other items that were never documented.
Oh, yeah.
Number 8, urine. Back during the medieval period, urine had a great reputation since it was thought to have cleansing and healing properties.
Side note, Romans, they used to brush their teeth with urine, with pee. That was a thing that some did. Yeah, just think about that.
So naturally, it would be used as a form of treatment for the plague. Finally, a remedy I can afford. Anyone infected with the disease was encouraged to take a bath with clean urine to relieve some of their painful symptoms. The urine would be collected from healthy people and sold to the sick, where it was then added to their bath water, or better yet, consumed directly from the glass. But if I was alive during this time period, I, for one, could never bring myself to partake in such a disgusting and humiliating practice. Buying from a middleman. Since I always say drinks are at their best straight from the faucet. Number 7, miasma theory. One of the most popular.
All right, so this is getting so they started right from like least gross or whatever to like most obscure. All right, this one there's actually some documentation we've read in class about this.
Straight from the faucet. Number 7, miasma theory.
Right.
One of the most popular theories at this time was that the plague was contracted by inhaling bad air, or simply put, bad odors. The long list of these bad smells included organic and human waste, decaying flesh, contaminated water, and of course, the Dutch oven. Which was a guaranteed way to be put on trial for attempted murder.
Yeah.
Bad smells were believed to carry
and get you not very well liked by your spouse. So I mean, obviously, if something has a bad odor, it's bad. Like it's the result of something else, something rotten or something like that. But yeah, there was this idea that like fumes and stuff, again, you kind of like fumigate your house to try to keep bad smells away. But yeah, it would come to that. But also like it could come from the ocean. It was, vapors of some kind. They just believed that those had a way of transmitting it. Now, remember, this is before, cellular biology and all this stuff. But yeah, these things like that seem tangible that way when it's really a microscopic and odorless, killer in this way. But that's what they were left with.
Contaminated air, which once inhaled would lead to illness. The public was encouraged to carry around flowers, rose petals, or herbs, which they would oftentimes hold to their nostrils, since they believed that the sweet smell would cancel out the bad air. This is one of the reasons plague doctors would wear these terrifying masks, since the beak would be filled with flowers and spices, which they believed helped keep the disease at bay. But of course, these wonderful smells did absolutely nothing in preventing people from catching the plague. If anything, it just gave people a false sense of security.
By the way, the plague mask thing I always thought was so horrifying looking, because it was supposed to have this like useful purpose, but like that plague doctor with the scary mask sticking out there, that's like the scariest. That's like the worst thing I want to see when I'm on my deathbed.
Number 6, leeches. Leeches were commonly used by the wealthy as a form of bloodletting and was relatively painless considering what the alternative was. But more on that one later. Bloodletting is when blood is drained from a patient, usually from an incision or leeches. Here, the leeches would be placed on a person's body while they kick back, relax, and let the leeches go to town. The theory behind this was that the leeches would suck out the bad blood, which was thought to cause illness. But the irony being that the leech's bite was the thing that could make them ill, since it always carried the chance of developing an infection. Now, originally, I didn't think this whole leech operation sounded too bad, until I saw the diagram for the most common locations for bloodletting. Number 5, the Vickery.
Did you get the inference there? Leeches down below. Yes. But again, another one of those things that actually is not going to help you at all and will likely make things much worse. Ugh. All right.
Diagram for the most common locations for bloodletting. Number 5, the Vickery method. The Vickery method was named after Thomas Vickery, the English doctor who invented the technique. And this would become one of the most popular cures during the plague. This first begins with a healthy chicken having its bottom plucked clean. The chicken's back door is then placed directly on a sick person's buboes and strapped down to keep it in place. The logic behind this...
buboes are the pus-filled sores that you have. They turn black. Gross.
Was based on the belief that chickens breathe through their back door. So in theory, it would suck out and absorb the sickness from the person. And if the chicken contracts the plague from the human and begins to show signs of illness, people would oftentimes take this as a sign that the remedy was working. If the chicken happens to die before the human, another chicken simply takes its place. Now, I can only speculate since there isn't much written on the subject, but this seems like a sure way to get an infection. You see, buboes would oftentimes grow so large that they would rupture, and a chicken's bottom attached to an open wound just seems like the best way to get your admission ticket to the afterlife.
Poor chickens. They're killing chickens. They have chickens to spare to be able to do this thing. I'd never heard of that one. Or the idea that chickens like breathe out of their butt. It's like they're just doing anything. That's what it is. It's like there's nothing. This is pre-scientific method and stuff like that, where it's just like you use something, and if it doesn't kill you, or maybe the person gets better, they take that as proof that it's that thing. They don't understand how you actually do science, where you have like placebos and you try to get some kind of neutral thing. You have to have in your scientific in your scientific method, you got to try things, you got to eliminate variables.
Flagellation. In Europe, during the medieval period, religion was deeply ingrained into all aspects of life. So naturally, people began to believe that the Black Plague was simply a punishment from God for their sins. Soon,
the end of times.
People began to gather and walk the streets while vigorously whipping themselves as a public display of repentance.
Look at the guy on the front right there. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but he's like, because this would be incredibly painful. And this guy likes it.
While I, for one, prefer to keep this kink at home. But to each their own. These groups of people would use leather whips with knotted tails, but some show-offs would take it a step further by adding nails to their whips.
Yeah.
These flagellant groups would recruit others when they would slowly walk from town to town, whipping their own backs and carrying crosses. They would do this act multiple times a day. But the real tragedy would come when one of these individuals would be infected with the plague.
So, by the way, the reason they do that is they're trying to recreate the torture of like Jesus Christ going through their own like atonement here. They're atoning for the sins of themselves or others. So these were like religious radicals that would do this. Again, trying to create pain to mimic, Christ's pain. And yeah, there would be like big groups of them, and they would go into a town, and some of them would do some messed up things. They'd go into town and try and do this as a sign to God or whatever. But then they would try to go and like root out in the towns what they think is the reason God is cursing them. This is also where we get like anti-Semitism and stuff, and going after, Jews or something, who was a big scapegoat for the plague back then. But yeah, they would try to root it out, and sometimes violently.
Since they were left to fight an uphill battle with an already deadly disease, and having a weak body that was severely cut up from the self-inflicted wounds definitely didn't help.
Yeah,
Number 3, feces. As time went on, physicians began to try all sorts of bizarre methods in the hopes of finding a cure, with this special paste being one of them. The paste consisted of tree resin, flower roots, and human poop. This operation would first begin with the patient's buboes getting sliced open, and as soon as the incision was made, it would then be stuffed with the paste, then tightly wrapped and sealed to hold everything in place. Patients would then be instructed to get some bed rest and
get infections.
Now, if the patient's body part had not fallen off by the following morning, they would for sure be left fighting a losing battle.
That's almost assuredly going to give you an infection.
Since it had now turned into a 2v1 with the person fighting against the plague and the infection. Number 2, bloodletting. This was an extremely popular medical procedure that was used from ancient times all the way through the late 19th century. This procedure was in fact so popular that during the medieval period, this would oftentimes be the first thing a doctor would recommend. This absolute nightmare would first start with a person getting their arms sliced open and allowing the blood to drain into a bowl. Now, if a cut on the arm made you uncomfortable, don't worry, since you always had the option to have the incision made on your neck instead. Now, the instruments that were used to slice patients open
get higher blood pressure going to be coming out there, trying to filter out, get out the bad blood there. But it's like they're injecting it with a bunch of nice, healthy blood.
Look like this.
Wait, what?
Instead. Now, the instruments that were used to slice patients open look like this, but just covered in blood from the previous patient.
Yeah.
Since being sanitary wasn't much of a concern during this time period, which of course would cause many patients to die from infection. But one of the most concerning things about this procedure was the amount of blood that would be drained, since it was common practice to increase the amount drained based on the severity of the person's sickness. Have a headache? That's 2 teaspoons. A fever? That's 16 ounces. A crippling social anxiety that prevents you from enjoying social gatherings? Yup, that one is about a gallon. Now, surprisingly, doctors were not usually the person to perform bloodletting and was actually a task left for barbers, since they were a lot more skilled in handling razors. This is the reason why they began to place the red stripe on the barber pole outside of the building, since it would let the public know that surgery was performed inside.
Yeah, your barber is also your surgeon, so you can... The spinning, I totally forgot about that. The weird spinning thing. Those even exist anymore? I don't see barber shops with that. I think you bring that back. All right, let's go back to the plague. Okay, this looks like a disgusting image.
Barber pole outside of the building, since it would let the public know that surgery was performed inside. Barbers would also pull teeth, amputate limbs, and make holes in people's heads. Number 1, extermination. Now, this would easily be the most extreme measure taken during the medieval period in the attempt to stop the plague. One of the groups that was heavily targeted were the Jewish. This would first start when the rumors began to circulate that the Jews had intentionally poisoned the drinking wells. So on September of 1348, a group of Jews would be taken as prisoners to Chillon Castle on Lake Geneva. There, they were brutally tortured until one of them would finally confess to poisoning the drinking water, which of course was not true. The information of this confession was then sent to various cities in Germany, and once the news arrived, it began to spread like wildfire throughout many countries in Europe. and thousands of Jews would then be targeted and murdered for this false confession.
Some of these, things too. They're saying how, like, the poisoning wells thing. That's what they talk about today, about like torture, and how torture is usually not a very good, actually reliable source of getting information from somebody, because they may not know and will give up false information to save themselves, because they're literally being tortured like to death. And yeah, so you get that. But another thing they would kind of say in accusation of the Jews would be like God is punishing them for basically like punishing communities because Jews live amongst them. Right, like that simple fact. So there would be these, movements to push them out, and a lot of Jews ended up leaving Western Europe here in this time in the Middle Ages, especially moving towards Eastern Europe, where they were treated better in areas around like Poland and stuff like that. So yeah, the anti-Semitism in the Middle Ages is very bad. Plague, probably its all-time height for anti-Semitism.
It was even documented that Jews from the age of 7 and up were all considered guilty for this crime, since the belief was that they all had previous knowledge of this plan. Even though the Jewish community was clearly suffering as they themselves were being decimated by the plague. But this wouldn't seem to matter to the general public, and the killings would tragically continue. And it wouldn't be until the spread of the plague began to slow down that the murders would too.
All right, final thoughts. All right, very interesting video again. So this is my first time with this channel. You got the Salmonella effect, doing some of the gross topics and content with the strange visuals that they had there. But yeah, no, I think this was very interesting. I learned about a bunch of things there that I didn't know before, especially like the chicken butt and stuff like that. These are great things. One of the reason, again, I do this kind of stuff and like to react to videos too is I get to learn about some of these odd stories and then share them in my classroom, and gets those kids that are kind of on the fence about really being interested in what we're talking about, and that'll perk them up, because anything gross like that is going to be memorable. So shoot, whatever you got to do to teach, right? So, all right. Well, what do you guys think about, how they went after the plague? Is it just ignorance beyond a reasonable, do you think a reasonable explanation for them? Of course, again, I was saying how they don't understand really the molecular level of disease spread and stuff like that. But does this stuff seem like inexcusable, you feel like, for how they were trying to deal with the plague there? Oh, so bad. All right, now that you're grossed out, hopefully you can get on with your day. All right, with that, we'll see y'all next time. Bye.